We're going to get to Jack Michaels in just a second. He was as exuberant as I've ever heard him, and he's always exuberant, as the Oilers have punched their ticket to the Stanley Cup final. They will go up against a Florida Panthers team who I believe is the best team in hockey. I said that going into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we saw what the Florida Panthers were able to do as they just suffocated Artemi Panarin, Chris Kreider, and Mika Zibanejad. So this should be a very fun Stanley Cup final. And we welcome in the voice of the Oilers. He, of course, is Jack Michaels, who's probably still on cloud nine. Oilers are in the Stanley Cup final. Jack, appreciate the time. How you been?
I've been great. It's a great time in the city, as you can imagine. Nowhere does it mean more than in the city of champions, so to speak. And Edmonton's hungry for its first Stanley Cup since you and I were in grade school.
We heard your exuberance. It was unbelievable, your call of the final minute. And I say whenever you hear Jack Michaels, it sounds like it's the Stanley Cup final every time. So to punch the ticket to the Stanley Cup final was awesome to hear your voice and your elation. But how do you describe that environment you were in and how you just process it a few days later?
Well, I mean, obviously you're kind of in the moment when it's happening. You're just trying to be a guide dog for the people who can't be there. When you're on the radio in particular, you're just trying to capture the vibe, right? You're trying to make it feel for your audience that, probably 10 times the people that are actually able to work their way into the building. You want to bring them inside a little bit. You want to make them feel like they're sitting next to you. But yeah, afterwards, you realize how much it means to the city. I mean, the one thing you get from living in Edmonton is, hockey is not, a niche market inside the city. It's what they rally around. The city is in a different sort of mood when the Edmonton Oilers are making a playoff run. It's a vibe unlike any other in the National Hockey League. And again, they're not part of the sporting landscape. They are the sporting landscape. And it's a special opportunity to kind of be part of that.
Now, I've never been to an Oilers game. I would love to go to an Oilers game, but living here in New York, I just haven't made the trip yet. When you do go to the game, though, do you always get that one beautiful woman who was showing, her hooters off, let's just say, to everyone? That video since has gone viral. Is that like a normal thing at Edmonton with hockey?
Boy, I thought you were going to come up with a better euphemism than that. Yeah. That was outstanding. No, and quite frankly, I mean, when someone asks me, well, where do I find that? I could probably give him a couple of hints. I have seen it, but no, that's not typical. But it just goes to show you that Edmonton, has other interests in life than just hockey, and they can be just as rowdy as the people in Vegas last year on their way to a Stanley Cup.
Last thing I'll ask you about this, and maybe it's just because I'm the biggest loser on the planet.
If you're asking me, do I have a way to get her on your show?
Yeah.
You'd have to give me a few days. I'd have to track that down. Zach, I'm picking up a certain vibe that might be your landing point at some point.
She's definitely my type. I'll be the first one to say it. But here's what I'm saying is I see that video. Everyone focuses on two big things. I'm looking at it. It looks like it's in Edmonton. That video went viral after Game 5. Game 5 was in Dallas. So if that was just at a watch party for the Oilers, that's the craziest thing I've ever seen in sports.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you and I, maybe we didn't go to the same concerts. I remember Def Leppard in the Round, in the late 1980s.
That doesn't happen at Springsteen, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, maybe not at Springsteen. Motley Crue, yes. Maybe Springsteen, no. But yeah, no, that's the thing about the city of Edmonton is it's a special place. They really get geeked up for watch parties. I mean, anything involving the Edmonton Oilers. And at this stage of the game, especially with the weather turning nice, perhaps maybe that's the reason behind it. Maybe it's a little humid.
Jack Michaels here with us. So nationally, everyone's going to talk about Connor McDavid. I'm running out of adjectives to describe him. I don't want to sell Leon Draisaitl short because we all know how great he is. He's just the second best player in this team, but he's still a top 5 player in the league. For the NHL to get McDavid and Draisaitl finally in a Stanley Cup final, just what do you think it means for the league?
I think it's huge. I think the National Hockey League and any league for that matter, I mean, think about when you and I were little kids. they wanted Michael Jordan in the final. They wanted Mario Lemieux in the final, and they had to wait. I mean, it doesn't come overnight. And LeBron James, another one. You want your marquee players to eventually play on the biggest stage. And I think, the time is right. Both McDavid and Draisaitl are entering their later 20s. Both have absolute complete games. Both are averaging nearly 2 points a game in the playoffs. They're at their height of their powers. And if it's going to happen for Edmonton, it looks like it might happen this year. And I think that's exciting for the league. And, for some of the markets where hockey is a niche sport, to have a guy like Connor McDavid, it can elevate the sport in that market because people get a real glimpse, for the first time at how good this guy is. I mean, I'm not naive. I'm from the East Coast. A lot of people are still going to bed when the Oilers games are maybe late in the first period or early in the second period. And I get that. And that's why this opportunity is so unique, to have Connor McDavid in prime time on the East Coast, on the game's biggest stage.
Talking to Jack Michaels, the voice of the Oilers. I remember a few years ago, you had St. Louis make a change in season. Berube was on staff. He took over. The Oilers made a change in season. I always knew Chris Knoblauch was going to be a head coach being a Ranger fan. I didn't think it was going to happen, though, getting hired to another team in season. What has Knoblauch brought to this team to turn them around and get them to the Stanley Cup final?
Well, you've seen his press conferences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's the same guy. I mean, he is – that guy reminds me of Bjorn Borg, who was once, I believe, recorded as having a heart rate of 35 right after he played a Wimbledon final. And that's exactly what Edmonton needed. Zach, you're in New York. You know the market. So when there's huge expectations and you're sitting at 2-9-1, the Mets lately. I mean, you cover these teams. You're in the fishbowl. So you know what I'm talking about. That's what it's like in Edmonton. And they needed a calming presence like a Chris Knoblauch to come in. I think of the Yankees in 78 when they brought in Bob Lemon. And they had Billy Martin. It was a combustible mix. And Bob Lemon came in and just calmed the waters, and they slowly chipped away at that huge lead Boston had. That's what Chris Knoblauch did for this year's Edmonton Oilers. He said, look, guys, there's 70 games to go in the season. All you got to do is win 5 of your next 8, 5 of your next 8, 5 of your next 8. The rest of the year, you'll be in the playoffs. And when you break the picture into much smaller components like that and just say, look, we got the tools. Stuart Skinner, you're our starting goaltender. We're sending Jack Campbell to the minors. We're taking 23 different penalty kill combinations. You're the same 6 guys. You're going over. We're going to have 3 different combinations from this point forward. The other guys, you know what your roles are. I'm going to play in those roles, and you'll either play your way out of this or we will have a miserable season. And just to chip away at that and just to be calm. I don't know whether you saw the clip of his audio during Game 7 of the second round against Vancouver. Edmonton coughed up a 3-0 lead. It was 3-2 all of a sudden with 4.5 minutes to go. He called a timeout. Hey, we've been here before. We'll be fine. Finish the game. They didn't give up a shot on net the rest of the way. That's the kind of calm I think Edmonton needed sorely at that point. An even-keeled guy. And you know what? Chris Knoblauch came in and did exactly what he had to do, is reinstill confidence in a club that was a preseason Cub favorite and gave them the requisite time to kind of play their way out of it without making wholesale changes, without pulling the trigger on some big trade. It was not a team that needed a guy to kick and scream. It was a team that it needed a guy to basically say, guys, we're fine. We'll be okay. There's 70 games to go. Chill out.
Last one with Jack Michaels. Hey, I saw this Florida Panthers team in person many times recently and then throughout the year. Bennett, Barkov, you got Bobrovsky, Kachuk. They're just phenomenal. How does Edmonton beat them? Because pound for pound, I do think the Panthers are the best team in the league.
Well, you can make the argument that Florida won the Eastern Conference Finals 6-0. I mean, it was, I think the Rangers might have had even terms, maybe 1 out of 6.
If it wasn't for Igor, they would have got swept. Let's just be real.
Exactly. They're loaded, and they're loaded for bear. The biggest thing Edmonton has to do is forget all stuff post-whistle. They cannot get involved in a rugged, face washing, gesticulating, forearms to the jaw type of game. The one thing I'll say is a couple years ago, Evander Kane got in Matthew Tkachuk's grill a little bit and rendered him ineffective in a series against Calgary. And Edmonton won that series in 5 games. They've got guys that can get involved in that stuff, but I still think Edmonton wants to concentrate its play between the whistles because Florida thrives on chaos. Chaos, between the whistles, after the whistles. They're a team that can beat you any which way you want it. Edmonton wants Florida to have to beat them man-on-man skill-wise. That's what the Oilers want because Leon Draisaitl said it best before Game 5 of the Dallas series. Deep down, we know that our best is better than anyone else's. So let's get to our best game and stay there for longer than he was talking about Dallas, but that'll be the key against Florida because you're absolutely right. This is a deep Florida team. This is going to be by far the toughest series Edmonton will play. But a lot of people picked Dallas. A lot of people thought the Stars had advantages in goaltending and depth, and that proved to be inaccurate. Stuart Skinner stepped up, and he better step up in this series because Bobrovsky has really turned the page in the last couple of years. Think about it, Zach. Prior to 2 years ago, Bobrovsky had a terrible postseason reputation, and he's really risen to the fore. So the game that the Oilers played in Game 5 of the Dallas series to take a 3-2 series lead was the best one I've ever seen them play, ever. In 14 years of covering the team, they won the game 3-1. They've got to play that game at least 3 times in this series to beat Florida.